flask. Eight-ounce hip flask. This is a matte black that I ordered through Amazon. Nice flask, 8 ounces. Check to make sure everything's working. Good condition. So first, you're going to take a tape measure and measure to see how far where you want to place the design on your flask. For this, I think I want not to go all the way to the end, so this would be 3 inches wide, maybe 3.5. So that's the surface area we're going to cover. I'm not going to put nothing on the back. I just want it on the front. If you want to put a name, you could add their name to it also. I don't think I want to though. That's for Flask. Shot glass. I have these. They come from the Dollar Tree. Take one out, and we're going to measure the area on the shot glass. So for the shot glass, we'll say maybe maybe 1.5. And wide I'm gonna go maybe for the shot glass. Now actually, after I put the image into the silhouette, I see that the width, per what we measured on the flask, we said 3 inches wide by 3.5 inches tall. It ends up the width should be longer than the height. So I put our dimensions 3.25, height 3, even though we said 3.5 when we first measured out what we wanted for this. But if we made the width of the design 3.5, or the length, I'm sorry, this is 2.5 right here. If we went as far as it would stretch it out. This is 3.5 inches tall, which is what we said that we wanted on the flask, but that doesn't look right. We would have had to make this wider, and we don't want that, because it's gonna go, if we make this wider than 3 inches, it's gonna go more to the sides. I don't want the image on the flask to, you know, go, I don't want the image on the flask to go wider than the front, so we're just gonna make it 3 instead. So I'm bringing it back to 2.5, so it's in proportion, if that makes sense. So our updated size is 2.5 inches high and 2.956 width. So if we look at the flask, 2.5 is going to go this high, and then it's going to be 3 inches across. So that's still going to be pretty good, but we'll leave it like that. I'm going to right click and ungroup so you can see, well, wait, let me move this, that it's 2 separate pieces to make the color. If you want to change the color, you just go over here. Let me move the camera. You go over here to the color. If I want to change it to blue, I can make it blue. Make the background white. Whatever you want to do. But since the common color is red and yellow like Superman, I'll just leave it like that. So this is for the flask. So I'm going to right click and group them. Now I'm going to need 2 dots up here in order to be able to separate the colors to do the layer. So I'm going to change the height to 3.5 to make that longer. Move this down. I'm going to go over here. Create a box. I'll make that a different color. See? And then I'm going to go up here to Object, Replicate, and Duplicate Right. Bring that over to this side. This is going to create where we can make it cut with the machine and can do the layer. I'm going to select and group these together. So again, our layer box is width 3.25, height 3.5, and that's going to be 2 layers. Now the next step is using our tape measure to cut out the specs that we just identified when I was in the Silhouette Studio software. That was 3 inches by 3.5. And again, using the tape measure on the different 2 colors of the permanent vinyl will get the pieces that you need to use to cut out the shape. Take your cutout pieces and weed now. Make sure you do it carefully and slowly. Take your time, because any small mistake, you're going to have to redo the whole thing. And I'm sure you're like me and you don't have time for that. So take your time, weed out each piece. Now you're going to take your transfer tape and cut it out the same size as the image that you just weeded. Going back to the Silhouette software, this time we're going to cut out the yellow background. So you're going to deselect the red, select the yellow, and then that's where you can see the bounding box of the yellow, where it's going to cut behind the forefront. And then we still have the purple squares highlighted because that's going to be our guide in order to do the layer. Going over to the Cameo, we started it, and now it's cutting out the yellow. Same with the red color. Now you're going to weed out the yellow carefully. Here's your background. Take your foreground. Line the squares up. Try to get as accurately as you can. Line them up. The top with the bottom. And as you see with permanent adhesive vinyl, the top layer you cut out first because it goes from top to bottom as far as the cutting order. That way you layer on top. So see, there's the top layer that's going on top of the bottom layer. If we had another color layer, it would be another color in between. Whatever your bottom layer is, the last layer that you use. So as you see from this, what I just did with this, I put the squares right on top of each other and it fit perfectly together. And then I'm using the squeezy tool to flatten it down. When I peel this up, because I made the background layer a tad bit smaller than the foreground layer, the red and the yellow both are going to adhere to my surface. That way it'll make double adhesion instead of just the red adhering to the yellow that's going to adhere to the flask. You have two layers that's going. Now we're going to cut off our guide squares because you want to make sure that that's not going to stick to the flask as well. So I just cut around the decal. That way we won't have as much transfer tape to deal with. Identify where you're going to place the image. Get it as straight as possible and even. And you're going to carefully place the image onto the flask. And you're going to use your, I call it a squeezy tool, but you can also call it whatever you like, a scraper tool, a credit card, whatever you have, and press down on it to make it the seal tighter and get out any of those air bubbles as much as you can. We're peeling back the transfer tape. Okay. It's a good seal. We do have some slight air bubbles, and that's to be expected. One tip for air bubbles is to take your scraper tool and poke a small hole in the vinyl very lightly, but you can also, and then you press down and it could get out some of those air bubbles. But another thing to know about air bubbles in permanent vinyl is if you let the product sit for a couple days, they take care of themselves. So eventually they flatten out without even having to do the little small holes. They have to adhere on their own pretty much. So a couple days later, it'll be flat. If you don't want to wait, then you can do the little poke and hold method. Small teeny holes, mind you, and flatten it out yourself. Now the process of doing the shot glass is pretty much the same. We already measured the shot glass and said it was going to be 1.5 by 1.5. You're just going to go to your silhouette and change the size. We're making sure that the right layer is selected, which when you start off, you make the purple selected and you're also going to make the red selected since that's the top layer. Go to the silhouette and cut it out First layer red, the top layer. We're pretty much following the same process as we did with the Flask, except this is the smaller version of the shot glass. You're still going to weed the top layer, you're going to weed the bottom layer, making sure that you have your square guides so you can lay one on top of the other. Very carefully weeding so that you don't puncture the design. We're using our transfer tape to transfer the vinyl from one surface to the other. Same process as we just did with the Flask. Go back to the silhouette and select the background color. Make sure your purple guides are selected. Go to the silhouette. Cut out your background, follow the same transfer process. Lay your top layer directly on top using the square guides. Same process as the Flask. You're going to layer it directly on top of each other. Try and get as even as you can so that way it could be a perfect fit. And using your hard surface tool, squeezing, scraper, whatever, flatten it as much as you can. When you pull up the transfer tape, you'll have that outline that's a tad bit crooked, but it's still going to serve its purpose. Set the decal on the shot glass. Using your hard tool, scrape it down. Make the seal permanent. Raise your transfer tape carefully, and there you are. Maybe air bubbles, may not be. Looks like we have just a few, and I'm going to use my tool to puncture a small hole to get those out, and pretty much that's a good fit. Here's our finished product, the Flask, 8-ounce Flask. 1.5 ounce shot glass, matching shot glass. You can elect to put epoxy on the Flask if you like. For this example, I did not use epoxy to cover the Flask. Either way, there's permanent vinyl and they will last.